Hibiscus is one of my favorite things. It makes a lovely, rich, tart, and tannic, bright ruby red tea, but it also can make some really exceptional alcoholic drinks. Our Craft to Brew wine kit comes with a recipe for how to make hibiscus wine, and in this video, we're going to show you that process. This hibiscus wine is being made with 2 ounces of hibiscus petals, a little bit of acid, and a lot of it of sugar for chaptalization. Chaptalization is the practice of adding sugar to a base in order to up the potential ABV for the wine that comes later on. And hibiscus basically has no sugar, right? So we're gonna have to add quite a bit in order to make this wine strength. We're gonna be using the Craft to Brew fruit wine kit for this, and turns out that kit includes the recipe for this wine. So let's take a look at what's inside the fruit wine kit, and then we'll reset and we'll make some wine. All right, inside the kit, of course, we have that guide to making wine, a packet including our airlock, stopper, the cap for the end of our racking cane, and a hose clamp, a carboy, racking cane and tubing, a packet with enough yeast to make 20 gallons of wine, and then all of this fun stuff. We've got potassium sorbate, Campton tablets or potassium metabisulfite, wine tannin, yeast nutrient, acid blend, pectic enzyme, and sanitizer. Additionally, we've got our fruit straining bag, which we'll be using for the hibiscus petals, and bucket and lid. So let's get everything out of the way we don't necessarily need right now and make some hibiscus wine. The very first step in making this wine is going to be to bring 1 gallon of water up to a simmer. Here I'm using spring water because I like the mineral balance on this, but if you have good tap water or well water, go ahead and use that. Your water does need some mineral content though, because it helps balance out the flavor profile, and you don't want your water to be too hard or too soft, kind of somewhere right in the middle. That's why I like to use spring water from a jug, because I know it's going to be good drinking water. Cool, let's bring this up to a simmer. Turn that off, and we're going to add our sugar directly to the water. We'll give that a nice stir with a clean spoon until all the sugar is dissolved. Now it's time to actually prepare our wine must. The first thing we need to do when mixing up our wine must is to get everything sanitized. We don't want any little bad buggies to get in there from our environment. The only microbe we want in our wine is the yeast that we're going to put in there. So I have some sanitizer mixed up here off screen. I'm going to go ahead and get everything dunked in sanitizer. It takes between 1 and 2 minutes of contact time for a no-rinse sanitizer to do its job. So if you're making this hibiscus wine along with us, grab half your sanitizer packet and mix it with 1 gallon of water. Use that to sanitize every surface of your bucket, your airlock, everything that might come into contact with your wine before we get started. I'm going to do that real quick and we'll be right back. With everything sanitized, including our mesh bag, we're ready to go. Even though this is still a little damp, remember, it's a no rinse sanitizer, so you don't have to be worried about the sanitizer coming in contact with your wine. The first thing that will go in will be our hibiscus flowers, and those go right into the bag. Next, we'll just tie that bag off with a nice knot right on top. You do want to make it kind of a loose knot though, because these are reusable bags and you want to be able to get the knot out later easily. Great, that goes in the bottom, and now we're going to pour our sugar water in on top. This just takes a little bit of confidence, but you can do it. And we are just a hair over the 1 gallon mark, which is just fine. Let's add our lemon juice, and then we're gonna let this cool down before we add anything else. If by chance you didn't hit the 1 gallon mark whenever you filled it up with the hot water, go ahead and add just a little bit more sterile water to it to bring it up to the 1 gallon mark or just slightly above. Now the juice of 1 small lemon. All right, now we're just gonna give this one more quick stir just to disperse some of the color from that hibiscus. Then we're gonna put on our lid and our airlock, and we're gonna let this sit until it cools down to room temperature. Just fill that airlock up to the fill line with clean water. And I'm mixing this up about 10 o'clock in the morning, so by bedtime, we should be ready to add the other ingredients and pitch our yeast. Our hibiscus wine must is now down to room temperature, so let's go ahead and add our couple of additives and our yeast. Now, over the course of a few days, you're going to want to open this up during fermentation and use a sanitized spoon to just press that bag back down. You just want to keep the bag wet with that alcoholic mixture because it's kind of like continually sanitizing it. Keeping that bag wet can help prevent mold and other infections from forming if something found its way in there. Since we used a little bit of lemon juice and it was full of pulp, we're going to put in a little bit of pectic enzyme. This will help us with clearing later. That's 1 teaspoon of pectic enzyme. Depending on the fruits or juices that you're working with, sometimes you might add more or less. It's always a good little kind of safety mechanism to add some whenever you're using fruit juice, just to drop any pectins that might lead to haze. And of course, we need yeast nutrient. We're also going to use 1 teaspoon of yeast nutrient. 1 teaspoon, right in. And last, but certainly not least, the thing that turns this from hibiscus tea into wine, and that is yeast. The yeast will eat the sugars, making them into alcohol and CO2 as a byproduct. That alcohol is what we're capturing in our wine. We're gonna go ahead and add the whole packet of yeast, but there's enough yeast in this packet to make 5 gallons of wine. But I don't like saving yeast, so I'm just gonna throw the whole thing right on in. Now that the yeast is pitched, we can put our lid back on, and we'll punch that cap every day for the first week. On the 8th day, we're going to stir up any yeast that settled at the bottom and transfer it over into the carboy to get it off of those petals. So other than coming and punching that bag down, I'll see you in 8 days. At the 8-day mark, it's time to get the hibiscus bag out of there. That is as simple as lifting the bag, squeezing as much of the liquid out of that bag as possible, and removing it to a bowl off to the side. Next up, it's time to transfer it into the carboy, so you want to make sure you stir up all the yeast at the bottom because you don't want to leave anything behind during this transfer because there's still fermentation that needs to be done. And you're going to want to empty and clean this bag as soon as you're done with your brew chores because this is reusable and you don't want it to get all mucked up and stained. So all of our gear is sanitized. We're just going to siphon it from this container into this one, put the airlock back on it, and then let it finish fermentation for a couple of weeks. As that's going, it's perfectly okay to gently stir the bottom to make sure you're picking up as much of the yeast in there as possible. And then as we start to get closer to the bottom, it's a good time to tilt that just a bit, so that way your siphon doesn't run dry. Now we'll take our sanitized and dried stopper, put it in the top. Like I said, give it another couple weeks. Our hibiscus wine has finished fermentation and it is looking beautiful. And so it's time to get it transferred into the bucket so we can get it stabilized. And then tomorrow we'll back sweeten it and bottle it. All of our gear has been sanitized with our sanitizer, just like we did when we mixed up primary. So everything's ready to touch our hibiscus wine. We just need to get a siphon started. So again, we're gonna use our water technique. So we'll just fill the tubing with water and then clamp off the end and then start our siphon. There we go. So we'll clamp that off, take off our airlock, and then our siphon goes in and we will let it flow and clamp it once we see the wine coming out. Then we can just transfer it to our bucket. As we start to approach the end, we'll want to tip it in the direction of our siphon, so that way we can get as much as possible without the siphon running dry. That smells amazing. Now we just need to add our stabilizers, and we're going to be using Campton tablets. That's potassium metabisulfite. This is an oxygen scavenger, removing oxygen from your wine that the yeast could use for synthesis. This is 1 out of 2 steps you need in order to stabilize a wine. So that's 1 crushed up Campton tablet per gallon. My hands are sanitized, so I'm just going to crush it in my fingers, but you can also crush it between 2 spoons. They crush up pretty easily. Next up is potassium sorbate. Potassium sorbate impacts the yeast's ability to reproduce. So if they can't eat and they can't make babies, they can't really do fermentation. We're going to use 1 rounded half teaspoon of potassium sorbate per gallon. Pretty cool, right? Now we just pop on our sanitized lid, insert our stopper and airlock, and then we'll come back in 24 hours to sweeten this up and get it into bottles. It's been 24 hours. So we're going to be going for a semi-sweet wine, which means 1/3 cup of sugar, but you can refer to the sweetening guide in your winemaking handbook in order to sweeten it to your preference. So what we're going to do is use this sanitized spoon and just slowly add the sugar, stirring until the granules dissolve. Then we'll let it sit for about an hour and come back and bottle it. Your goal is to disturb the liquid's surface as little as possible because we don't want to whip in any oxygen. So just stir and add. All right, excellent. So we'll just put the lid on, and in an hour, we'll come back and get this into bottles. All right, we use that hour to get everything set up and staged, get our bottles sanitized, and get some sterile water ready so we can get our siphon going. So let's just get the siphon going, and then we'll get it bottled. Okay, with our tube filled with water, we'll pop the top on that bucket. And then just push all the way down so that way our tube is touching the bottom of the bottles. Then you're just going to clamp it when the liquid line reaches the top of the bottle. And transfer that to the next one. As you get to the end, you'll need to tip your bucket to make sure the siphon stays below the liquid line. All right, we had enough there for 5 bottles. And so now it's time to get some corks in these. So we're using our hand corker. And all you do is put a dry cork in here and plunge it into the bottle. Easy as that. Here's how it works. Take your cork, stick it in here, place that on the neck of the bottle, and then just press down. like to get a little bit better leverage, so I'm gonna grab a stool so I can put the full weight of my body into it. Being up just a few more inches is really helpful. Five bottles of hibiscus wine. I'm gonna let these age in the bottle for 1 month, and then we'll come back and do a taste test. One of the things I love about this recipe in particular is that it doesn't need a lot of long-term aging to be ready to drink. So this has been sitting in the bottles for about a month. I say we open one up and give it a taste. Smells like hibiscus and dark red fruit. A little bit of a raspberry kind of character in there. It's amazing what you can get just from those flower petals. It kind of goes right down the center of your tongue with a rich floral and fruity flavor. I like this in this kind of semi-sweet to off-dry range, but I could see where folks might want it a little bit sweeter. And of course, in our winemaking handbook, we have a guide for how much sugar you should add to get to kind of an average level of sweetness to match your palate. It's refreshing and tart, almost like a hybrid of the best of both worlds between a red wine and a white wine. Stick around, subscribe to the channel. We have a lot of recipes and ideas coming up very soon. And if you've made a hibiscus or flower petal wine, let us know in the comments what worked, what didn't, and what are your recommendations. See you next time.